In France today, the political film dealing with social issues has become very popular. There is nothing especially political in these films beyond the superficial treatment of poverty, racism, or crime. The documentary form, however, is offering some striking counterexamples to this, and two filmmakers in particular may signal a new wave of cinéma politique in France. Sylvain Georges and Jean-Gabriel Périot. We met with both recently. This week we went to Montreuil, a suburb of Paris where Périot is based. He was an editor before he became a filmmaker, learning the trade at the Pompidou Centre where he worked in the archives. His move into filmmaking began with a series of short, experimental films, sometimes only made up of still images. In 2015, he made his feature-length documentary Une jeunesse allemande, or A German Youth, which was made up entirely of archives from the Red Army faction in Germany in the 60s and 70s. Périot charted how a group of young people, many of whom were amateur filmmakers, would evolve into what we know today as the Baader-Meinhof Group, an armed guerrilla movement against the state. In doing so, Périot was also questioning the label of terrorism that is often applied to their activities. We met Périot in his editing studio, where he worked on A German Youth and is now preparing his next film. Jean-Gabriel, thank you very much for coming to talk to us today. If you could give us a sort of brief summary of what A German Youth, your feature documentary, is about in terms of the sort of historical subject matter.
The film is about the history of the third generation of the RAF. So it's a Red Army fraction in English. And it's mostly focused on the life of some of the founders of the group. Before they found the group, A German Youth became my first feature film because of the material itself.
Uns interessiert speziell der politisch engagierte Film.
Mit Filmkameras dann agieren wir auch, nur in einem anderen technisch-chemischen Verfahren.
Sondern wir sind engagiert für diejenigen, die sich versuchen zu befreien von Terror und Gewalt. Viel zu lange beim Revolutionäre gespielt.
You began by making short films,
Yeah.
if I understand, quite a number of short films before moving on to the feature-length documentary. And perhaps we can sort of talk a little bit about why you decided on the subject for A German Youth.
Just I read a book about the RAF, and by chance or coincidence, and I was really like surprised by the life of some of the founders of the group, because some of them are linked with images in general, because part of them were director, journalist, filmmaker, photographer, so they produce images, and some of them were like prominent people in Germany at this time. They were invited to participate in TV.
Will man, wenn man, sagen wir, ein Volk erziehen will, obwohl das natürlich ungeheuer anspruchsvoll und geradezu anmaßend klingt, dann muss man sich darüber klar sein, dass ohne dass man demokratische Voraussetzungen schafft, innerhalb derer dann echte Autorität meinetwegen zum Zuge kommt und der Missbrauch von Autorität ausgeschaltet wird, beziehungsweise Servilität und Unterwürfigkeit, obrigkeitsstaatliches Denken und Untertanentum nicht mehr vorkommen. Das alles kann man nur leisten, wenn man innerhalb der Gesellschaft wirklich materiell etwas verändert.
Das akzeptiere ich nicht.
Ich weiß nicht, ich bin schon der Meinung von Frau Meinhof, dass das Institutionelle und die Praxis eine große Rolle spielt.
It's a unique story. It's the only group that will go to armed struggle or to terrorism that produced so much images before. So it was a way I could question what is commitment, what is political violence, but also what is cinema. Ulrike Meinhof and Holger Meintz, so the most important filmmaker of the group. And Ulrike Meinhof was not really like a filmmaker, but she was making a documentary for TV station. And both of them tried to. They felt that it was. They were unsure about just doing films, so they tried to make engage cinema.
Und jetzt noch mal was aus. Das gut? Sag mal merken. Nein, nicht merken, sondern ausführen müssen Sie das. Soll nicht mehr vorkommen. Ist gut. Ist klar. Jawohl. Sie sind lange genug bei uns, Sie kennen das. Sie wissen, dass hier Alkohol nicht reingeschmuggelt wird. Ja. Oder wollen wir erst wieder ein Theater haben, dass er euch wieder schlaft oder das Mobiliar kaputt haut? Nö. Gibt es nicht. Gut.
The next step for them was to found the group. There is some part of coincidence, but for sure both of them felt that they failed with cinema as a political tool.
And so to make your own film on this, how were you sort of engaging with that story and also commenting on it?
I did it because I had so many questions about what is terrorism, what is commitment, what is the reaction of the state against terrorism. That is still really contemporary.
Well, everybody's brandished a terrorist as well in terms of, I mean, for a very contemporary example in France with the emergency state, that you can effectively ban all protests and any activist prevented from exerting their own freedom. And I think that someone was telling me earlier that the main union in France was being described as sort of terrorist.
And it's also a way to cut the history. To call someone a terrorist is just to cut everything that is, where this person is coming from, what is the story behind that. And it's like a monster. You create a monster. And with the RAF, it was possible to bring back that they were not monsters.
And indeed that does make the film extremely contemporary in as much as, even though you're treating a historical subject, it has a commentary on today's world. Yeah. I suppose I also wondered whether you had certain films in mind that had influenced you on the subject when making it, whether
not at all.
None were particularly important. I mean, obviously the one that sort of springs to mind Fassbender's sort of treatment in Germany in autumn, and I wondered whether that was sort of relevant or not at all.
Some films were really important for me, like Germany in autumn, and for example, for this film, I think it was the first film I saw about the story, because in one hand I found the film really amazing. It's really a wonderful film, and it was really ununderstandable. I understand nothing at all.
To go back a little bit, what were the first sort of films that you then went on to make? How did you start?
I decided to be a filmmaker when I was a teenager, but I don't really go to film school or this kind of training, and I just go to the university, and I had the chance to have some editing training. I think when I was 25, something like that, I felt that it was time to start to make my own films, archive film.
And so what was it that interested you in the archive? In what way was that a sort of a terrain that you wanted to explore?
As soon as you use pre-existing material, you have to face the question of memory, representation, and for me it's also a really political question, because history is wrote by the winner of the history, so it's to question the main media, main representation, and also why some images were inefficient to write history.
When you speak about the way we present a certain issue, one would think naturally maybe of the migrant crisis and the way we represent refugees and migrants coming over. And in the mass media, certainly, there's a tendency to record, often from afar, big groups of people coming. There's not a sense of humanizing this subject, and that is a very strong way of representing, and in terms of archive, those are a lot of the images that will go into the archives.
Perhaps I can talk within a German youth. I try to confront different kind of archive material from TV stations, what was happening in the 60s, 67, 68 in Germany. And the editing is confronting those images to the films by the student or militant filmmaker.
Were you happy or were you satisfied with the way that a German youth was received, whether it generated the kind of discussion perhaps and the kind of questioning that you would have hoped?
For sure, it was really interesting to release a German youth. It was quite unexpected. The feedbacks, even from in France, from the press, from the really right press, were really like give good feedbacks on the film, because I think there is no voiceover, and because it's like archive, so it was like that. And I don't force the people to think. Everyone just think what he wants about the story at the end, so I don't force the point of view. And it was really interesting. I did like a tour with the film in France, and it's really interesting the way the debates were not like, never like simple Q&A about the filmmaking, but it was always a debate, political debate, about the difference in between the past and today. We talk a lot about terrorism, the use of terrorism by the states. It's sometimes we spend like 2 hours or even once like 3 hour debates after the film. That is quite amazing. People really wanted to talk.
Yeah, and it's almost like the way, by having made it in such a way, you opened out the discussion rather than trying to make a political film with a political point and with a real message that would actually foreclose discussion or would alienate people on the right or alienate people on the left. And do you think that, therefore, that's the kind of role that you would see documentary films playing today?
For sure, there is a strange moment with documentary, because there is a lot of documentaries that are released in Cinéma, and they are quite successful, and a lot of political films. That is quite new. But myself, as a filmmaker, there is no difference in between documentary and fiction. For me, even a documentary is a construction. And even as a filmmaker, I go from documentary to fiction, and I come back. For me, so there is something I don't really like. Then, even as a filmmaker, to separate the genre, because for me it's just film.
Jean-Gabriel, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.